New digital technologies are driving a step change in enterprise business transformation. At the Digital Twin Podcast, we explore the intersection of technology and business. What should your digital twin look like?
Back with the Digital Twin Podcast. This is the start of season 2. We're going live, our first season 2 session. Be sure to look out for the links that are out there and join if you can. But today we're going to focus a little bit on, you know, how much effort does it really take to engage in certain digital transformation initiatives, right? How much time do we have, the right resources? Is it all worth it? Is it worth it, right? I think everybody will start figuring out whether do we have the capacity to do this, and is it worth it for us to do this today, 5 years from now, or it, those types of things. I mean, you've seen this multiple times, Hari. I mean, when customers are trying to grapple with cost benefit analysis is one piece, just the price of it, but what is it really going to take from our end? Is it a turnkey for somebody to do something? Is this consulting? The consultants come in and do something, or is it we have to really get our hands and feet on the ground to do some of this, right?
One of the biggest things about this that always kind of concerns me is people are after technology first. What's most attractive in terms of the latest and greatest technology, whether that's hardware, software, it doesn't matter, right? Do I have the fastest sensor, or the fastest processor, or the either best edge device, or the latest technology to stream to cloud and do data analytics in the cloud? It's all great, but does that align with your company's strategy? If not, it has to go out the door. It doesn't belong in your list of items in the first place, right? Before you even start to prioritize, should that even belong there?
Yeah, it's sometimes we can get a lot of different groups within a digital transformation initiative will start running, hey, go investigate this technology or that, and all of a sudden you have little mini science experiments running around, and and sometimes it just gets lost. Everything gets lost in the hay, and people forget really what they're trying to focus and achieve. And this is where in our previous season we talk about leadership and how all that ties into having a strong vision on really what you're trying to do and prioritize that. And you know we talked about it a little bit on the last episode of tangible and intangible, how sometimes tangible benefit can really lead to short-term thinking and real short-sightedness on what projects get implemented first, because they ultimately impact some of the key areas of the business, such as revenue, cost, risk, or safety, right? So you know having focus on something that's a short term and a quick win, you know, oftentimes, you're trying to see value really quickly, but one of the pieces that always gets missed is who is actually going to be doing the heavy lifting to try to really transform our organization. Is it a third party? Is it a vendor? Is it a consulting group? Or is it my own people that have the 9 to 5 tasks that are already in front of them every day to put out fires,
Yeah.
right?
That probably depends on the complexity of the project that you've undertaken, right? The question then becomes, how complex on a scale, how complex is it? If you almost have to put that into an X and Y axis, right? Where does it fall on the scale of complexity? Where does it fall in the scale of value, right?
Hmm.
And it's really complex, but brings amazing value. You want to get there someday. It may not be the first thing you start with, right? We always talk about quick wins,
Yeah,
right? And
it's
we
like it's like
yeah. So where does
it's
that
like
fall, right?
yeah, I mean it's a quadrant, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what is going to take me less effort but give me some value, right?
Quick.
Versus
Yeah.
quick and maybe not a lot of value, and you start to prioritize where all
But it's
these fit.
quick. You get it done quick. You get on the path, and you show the results, and folks are getting on the train, right? The digital transformation journey, right, that we talk about all the time.
So you're saying that you have to make the company believe that you're on the right
Absolutely.
track?
We have seen that
So
all the time, right? It's if you don't, then you simply don't have a chance of being successful.
so quick wins showing that leadership of how you're moving the ball forward and how you're impacting the business
Yeah,
in a way, it's some of the key aspects, right? And a lot of that takes effort, right?
yeah,
And a lot of that is driven by the individual people that are already there on the ground
right,
today, right?
right.
And they have to be aligned to wanting this change as well, right? I mean, we see, you know, I mean, we don't want to get back into the episode of talking about culture, but you can see how that ties into the overall effort and ability for you to even execute and complete some of these initiatives, right? I
To
mean,
that
that's a
point,
huge bill.
it is. To that point, though, some of the projects that involve heavy change management may not be the first projects to take on. But if it's complex enough and brings in significant value, right? Or maybe let's take a step back. If it's maybe not that complex, but there is significant value, it may not be quickly realized, but there's significant value in it. That's going to be a flagship project for you. It's not technically massively complex.
Hmm.
That's a flagship win, and it's going to get more press than a quick win that you had.
That's true.
Gets more people on board.
Yeah, so, you can kind of look at some of these. There's a lot of, you know, projects being done around even looking at Salesforce, right? Organizations and sales, right? Like they implement these nice CRM tools and there's a lot of AI and metrics and KPIs that are around behaviors of how, you know, salesperson or the sales process should run. You know, who sees value in that? And is it actually bringing value? And how are you taking information and metrics and turning that into real value and that added
Yeah.
benefit, right? So this is a very fundamental thing about all these digital. I just give you an example there is that you can put more emphasis on, hey, make sure you put data in. Hey, make sure you do double work to do what you're doing and put this in because we need to have visibility on it.
Yeah.
But are you really adding value to your overall organization? Or are you just adding more burden, right? And
Yeah.
how do you measure some of that? We talk about tangible and intangible. Maybe you see the tangible, but do you under, do you really see the intangible benefit that may be developing underneath the surface with an organization, right? I mean,
Right.
and how much effort are they really going to be putting into that to adopt these things? And maybe you have to institute new change management policies and all that, right? So that's a big lift,
It
right?
is a big
So
lift.
something that's small can really be big.
It could be
You
big.
know, and the
Yeah.
surface, I mean, you can think about that. I mean,
Who you mentioned that, right? Value in whose context,
big time. That's a big question right there.
right?
Nobody
Who
talks about who's this benefiting.
Right. Who's benefiting? And sometimes we get all excited about improving our internal processes and hey, we gained X amount of time, but we did this and we did that. You know, whether it's tangible or intangible, that may be great, but it's not impacting your customers, your interaction with your customers. Really, is it that much more value? I mean, your customers come first. You exist because of your customers. If you improve their experience, maybe 1%, right? That may be worth more than 25% improvement in your employees' experience. Now, I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but the reality is your customers keep you, profitable, keeps your lights on, and keeps you going.
Yeah, so I think we're hitting on a lot of these themes here. I think the digital journey is long and the transitioning is very fluid,
Yeah.
right? As you see more digital driven culture start to apply more technology and more metrics visibility, you're subtly shifting culture, but you might be impacting the way you do things as you mentioned, a customer experience on how you would normally handle that changes because the behavior or the different things that are being instituted internally may be challenging, right? So
Yeah.
it's a give and take, and you learn as you grow. But the one thing that's clear is that it's not going to stop. The constant transformation is going to be going, and some are going to be more successful and more adopted than others, but and some will just have to. We got to learn to live with it, right?
That's true.
So this is the type of world or reality that digital transformation brings to organizations, and it intertwines, as we say, into culture, into behaviors and technology,
And it's
and
a constant iteration of trying to evaluate, reevaluate your priorities based on all these complexities that we talked about, right? Whether it's technical complexity or even, organizational complexity, or even, you look at the value side of things. Who are the beneficiaries of what you're doing, and is there a 10x value in doing something, right?
10x is very big. I mean, not everything has a 10x value, right? I mean, that's a big deal, though. I mean, when you mention that the value, I mean, when we think about this, just think about this, Hari. If you're doing a lot of these projects and you don't see value throughout these projects, tangible value, I mean, what's the next step? I mean, should you go on to the next initiative, or what's going to happen, right? What is the appetite to continue to transform if there's a couple failures, right? This is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Should they scrap the whole initiative and redo it the next 5 years?
That takes us back to the organizational culture topic that we had a few sessions ago, right? That relies on what sort of structure that you've put in place. Is the organization okay with failure? And try something else.
Hmm.
Don't continue to focus on what transpired, and if it's not the right fit, try to go hit the next one.
Yeah.
Can you quickly make that shift?
Yeah, and you know, we come back to the value and effort, right? At, we always forget that while you're trying to transform, you're trying to run a business. And that's not always the easiest thing to keep running the business and try to transform at the same time.
Yeah,
It's a parallel process. It is,
it
but
is.
it's double the effort, or
It
sometimes triple the effort.
it
And
is.
the question for a lot of clients is how much of that do we want to take on versus outsource? And there are some pros and cons to a lot of that. So those are the weighing of the initiatives, and thinking that one initiative is quick win, small value could quickly turn into what were we thinking about?
Do you think that outsourcing of that capability would actually help an organization innovate faster? Maybe provide maybe different sorts of ideas and viewpoints than you may find internally.
I think it can. It can provide exciting viewpoints, different strategies, change for sure. But we come back to that secret sauce, Yeah, we have a great new way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
but if you don't have your culture bought in and aligned to making that happen, adoption becomes very tricky, right?
Yeah.
And how is this new change affecting my role, my day to day? Is it making it more work, less work? Is it helping me? These are all these are all the layers that go into adopting and the success rate of your digital transformation initiatives. And I think a lot of times that gets missed, right? The real human element. How is this really going to affect that first line, that second line, that third line? What does that look like?
That's where
You
the
know,
transformation truly happens, right?
yeah, I mean, that's exactly where it happens. But
At least from an operational perspective.
everybody sees it up here. Like, here are the results, here's the value, here's the tangible benefit. But when you drill down to that tangible benefit that you may be getting may be hurting a lot of different things. And it's not because people just don't want to do. They may be doing double work or triple work. You may not know, but are you willing to sacrifice a lot of that culture,
Yeah.
organizational workforce? I mean, you got to really think about how this is going to impact each of these people along the way to get that tangible benefit. It sounds great on paper and in theory, but when you start to go and execute and figure out exactly how this is going to affect your organization, um, you may be in for a few, speed bumps along the way, but
It's
hopefully you can
expected.
mitigate those as best as you can to minimize the effort and minimize the restarting and resetting.
Yeah, and
So,
that I think it relies on that prioritization that we talked about, complexity, value. Where does it really fall? What is what's on the time horizon? What's quicker? What's going to take you more time? What's going to take you more time, complexity, and bigger change management? That's even though there's humongous value in it, it's going to take you time, and it's
so what do you think out there, Hari? I mean, you know, a lot of people are in the camps of let's do something small and quick to show a quick win, right? To build momentum versus the full out blown strategy of how we're transforming our organization in the next 5 to 10 years, right? You know, I think if you were to take a step back and look, if you were in a position, let's hypothetical, you put yourself in a CIO or a CTO, a CDO, a C-suite, and you were driving some of these initiatives, how would you approach it? Like, what would be your first, what would be your first step? Like, how would you analyze that piece? Looking at kind of what's happening out there, how
so
would you look at that?
I think we have hit on some of those points. I mean, the reality is we don't always, assuming that I'm a CDO, I'm not going to always know exactly what's right, right? But I want to have the opportunity to try many things. Obviously, I want to have a budget. Now, as a CDO, um, most organizations have a set amount of dollars set aside,
Hmm.
right? SEIO's budget is probably much kind of attuned to the infrastructure support, maintenance, uptime, and a whole lot of other
Security. Hmm.
security and a whole lot of other things. But as a CDO, you and your team are solely dedicated to really innovating within the organization. You're looking for outside ideas, outside innovations, trying to create breakthroughs inside. So if I was in that role, I want to be able to try at a relatively low resource expense. That could be people, time, money, all of that, all of the above, right? Because
So
I
would
wouldn't
you
be operating with an unlimited budget.
So would you like to outsource some of the effort, or would you like to take a lot of that effort internally with some of your people? I mean, so what do you see on that front? I
So
mean,
that's a
since
tough
we're
one to answer, partly because some of the organization, depending on the size of the organization, has very large, IT functions with development organizations. Now, they may or may not have the bandwidth to take something on. Assuming you're in a mid-tier organization and you don't have that sort of a support, again, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, right? My take on that is I would want to take external help, and because they're going to be seeing
Mhm.
many different industries, many different customers, and they're exposed to many different sort of situations. And I want some of that input coming into my organization, number one. Number two, I want the ability to innovate, try new things, prototype things fairly quickly. And if I fail, I fail. I don't want to take
Yeah,
months, costing me so much money, effort, resources to then find out that hey, it's not the right fit for me. Maybe it's a great solution, or maybe it's a great direction to take, not
mhm,
the right step for my organization or my team, right? Or my
yeah,
industry. So you sometimes have to iterate fast,
yeah.
fail or win. Maybe even when you win, you may discover that it's not worth executing at that point in time. Maybe you need to wait a certain amount of time. But you got to try before you even find out all those details, right? That's just my
Yeah.
take on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very similar take, the way, I see it, looking at value and effort, it's really what's important to the business for me, right? If I know critical aspect, as a CDO or a CIO, that there are certain pieces of information that are absolutely valuable and certain pieces of data that if we do have or don't have could really benefit in a significant way, then those would be priorities, right? So looking at the overall infrastructure, the sources of data, where that is available, and how reliable it is would be some of the key focuses, right? Because without that, you know, you're right, you keep trying and you constantly fail, but if you don't build an infrastructure or an organization that is able to adapt and take in valuable pieces of information that are business critical, or complementary to the critical information that can give us some better context or perspective, I think could be very unique. So really broadening out a framework to be able to capture business critical data at a very reliable and secure way, as
Yeah.
well as data that may or may not be there through new sensors, as we mentioned in our previous sectors, or looking at ways of consolidating that data so that we can have access in a much more rapid pace.
Yeah.
So
Break down silos of those.
yeah, yeah. So to me, it's a real, to me that's a game changer.
Yeah.
As an organization, if you can
I think it's
have,
foundational. You're absolutely right.
it's a very foundational piece, and you know, a lot of people get locked into the beautiful AIs and
Yeah.
the MLs and all the beautiful analytics out there.
Yeah.
But what does all that have in common with all the beautiful technologies and all the data-driven technologies is that
Data.
you got to have data, but it's got to be good and it's got to be reliable. So to me, technologies and algorithms and great things out there will always get better. But the one thing that has to be ironclad or has to be almost fail-proof, I mean, you almost got to have some serious infrastructure around that is your data management and how you make sure that that data is reliable.
And as yeah, and as part of that, the only thing I would add, I think you're right on. Like that's foundational. That has to be there. That's the first step in the process, almost right. But you also have to put some metrics in place based on the business needs, what the business is trying to do and accomplish, right? And
Mm.
then whatever you're trying to do as part of the transformational efforts, you have a reference point to go back to. Are you making progress? Are you doing better?
Yeah, so I think that's a very, it's an important point, and I'll just add this one last piece because it comes back to the effort, right? Because, how much effort are we as an organization willing to take? And I know it can be tough, but the way I would look at this is I would have one or two critical experts in my that are internal that would have serious knowledge of what's important, how the data gets moved around.
Yeah.
But then bring in a third party that can do a lot of the heavy lifting to actually validate, create the streams, create the sources, create the plugins, get everything that we need, outsource that, but have a couple of key experts within our organization to drive that vision. Because at the end of the day, I've seen a lot of ways where we use all our internal resources to try to do this versus outsourcing everything, and it lies somewhere in the middle.
There is
It
definitely a
really does.
balance.
It lies somewhere in the middle, the balance. And I think if anyone that's watching this, you should take this away. The big takeaway here is that it's somewhere in the middle. And your organizations and the resources you have and the money you want to spend and some of the talent and expertise that's out there. So weigh those out, see what's important, lay that out strategically, and hire the best that you can in those areas that you want to focus on first. That would be my way of looking at that. I think looking at that effort and value, it's a balance, as you mentioned, Hari,
Yeah.
and it's important to take a key look at that, especially if you're trying to move along and be successful to keep having these initiatives move along your journey.
Perfect.
So
Well, I think that's a good way to bring this back to where we started, and that was effort versus value.
yeah,
Um,
and
because it
that
was,
yeah.
Yeah.
And for those that want to know more, I think we do have a previous podcast on tangible benefit that you can probably get some more context on what we mean by value. And some of the efforts in around digital leadership, we have a couple of we have a episode that talks about the leadership
Yep.
task force and the groups around there that you can kind of look at and tie some of those things in. But at the end of the day, the effort and values there, but everything kind of somewhat interlinks in a balanced
Absolutely.
approach, right? So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you all for listening. You can find us, Hari, on the Digital Twin Podcast, our website. You can find us on YouTube as well as Twitter. And stay tuned for our next episode next week.